All right, I think we're there. Takes a second. All right, guys. So this is going to be a Q&A session with Wall from Wallcraft. Now, I'm going to be playing you a little bit of eye candy in the background. I'm going to be playing on his server. I'm just going to be running around just doing random stuff because the main attraction is going to be Wall himself giving us his thoughts and feelings on the server. We're going to be starting off first with a couple of basic questions. I want to introduce you to Wall, get his ideas on why he's doing Wallcraft to begin with, and just some fundamentals down. Followed by, I wish to talk about the systems of his server. I want to get down and deep into what makes Wallcraft unique and special from all of the other servers that are just popping out of the blue now. I mean, I just made a video not too long ago on what is Sargeras's Embrace. So many new servers are coming out. So, what separates Wallcraft from the rest? So, I would like to introduce you to Wall. Say hello.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so once I switch over here now. So, my first question to you was without, you don't have to go into the drama of other servers, but why are you making Wallcraft?
Wallcraft's been something that I've been working on for almost 4 years now. It's been a long-term project. I've committed countless hours. I can't even tell you how many hours I've sunk into this at this point. But it was a project that was started when Highjaw had experienced a meltdown with the OVH fire, and all my guild members were basically looking for a place to play while we were waiting for the server to come back online. So I looked into how to set up a vMango server, and I got one fired up on my computer. And we hung out, we played for a little while, and then Hyjal eventually came back online. So went back over there, but after Hyjal had closed down subsequently, my interest and my curiosity was piqued more and more. So I started researching and reading and looking through the core. And originally, Wallcraft was a 1.8.4 client server, and it had progressed all the way through to the 1.12 client, which is now the final state. And after a while, I just started getting into adding custom features, quality of life tweaks, small little things to optimize the game world for better play. And it just kind of spiraled out of control from there to where I spend every waking moment of my day at this point trying to optimize the vanilla game world to be the most engaging and all-encompassing MMO experience for a player.
Okay, and you kind of touched upon it a little bit there, but let's explore that further. So my next question would be, why choose the 1.12 client over 1. Or not 1. 3.3.5, as it seems to be with other servers that they would downgrade it to a Warcraft, or I mean a vanilla or a TBC state, and then expand upon that as it seems to be easier for them. So why choose the 1.12 client?
For me, it's not vanilla unless it's vanilla. Unless the client and the server are designed specifically for vanilla, it won't feel like vanilla for the player. And vanilla has a very dedicated following, almost a cult-like following in the community, because vanilla is different than every other expansion. It has the original framework for the game and the original structure of everything that would come afterwards. So to preserve the integrity of the vanilla game world, it's impossible to do with anything else. Even with the newer client, the 1.14 classic WoW client, it doesn't really feel like vanilla. It doesn't give the same experience. The amount of players you can really handle on screen at one time, it's just simply not comparable. And the fixes and the tweaks that are available for the client for the original 1.12 client at this point make it run silky smooth. There's really no issues with the client with the new Vulkan optimization stuff that you can do for vanilla fixes or vanilla tweaks. All the little features that you have available for you, it runs better than any later client. It runs better than the Wrath client. It runs better than the classic client. Any client really. vanilla has the lowest overhead and some of the best optimizations. And for a lot of players, having a lot of people on screen at once is very important. You know, that's why vanilla was considered the most epic expansion, because you could have a 200 versus 200 person battle with no problem. And that was just a daily occurrence, you know, and something that gets lost in later expansions when there's a lot more overhead to everything that's going on and under the hood of the client.
Okay. Um, Now, in terms of the client itself and developing the server, are you the sole developer, or are there other people who help you out with it?
It's just me. It's been a solo project for the entire time running. I do get some help from the community and a lot of friends. There's a few particular people like Ever Jr. who they do Blender work that I'm not really, you know, skilled or knowledgeable on. So stuff like new model creations, things like that, I do have help with, but everything else is all me. For me, really, Wallcraft is a hobby project and it's a learning project. It's for me to learn how the game works even better and how to influence the game in a way where it can be expanded upon with the original design notes and the original structures that the developers had intended from the original notes that they had taken during the beta and alpha processes. So for me, it's kind of like a research project.
All right. Now, from there, we're gonna start going into the systems, but first, before we like deep dive into them, uh, I want you to tell me what are some of the key features of your server and your vision for the server.
The biggest facet of Wallcraft is going to be the open world PvP. And I think that that's really the main focus in vanilla. And it's not just simply player versus player combat, it's player versus player interaction. And grouping with players, whether it means grouping with players or fighting against them, contesting them with groups of people or solo, um, really engaging in an interaction with a different player and either a positive way or even a negative way. Um, that's the fundamental principle of what a good MMO should be about, and that's what made vanilla and the early expansions good. When later expansions became more and more about a solo linear grind with treadmill systems tacked on, it lost so much charm and value and replayability for the player. Whereas in the older expansions, just hanging out in a zone where the enemies were higher level with a friend and being able to clear them and spending a day questing and getting, you know, orange or red quests done, getting a lot of experience. Those kind of interactions and engagements are what make the game special. So the focus is always going to be on that. And anything else is tertiary to that. Um, the biggest cornerstone of Wallcraft, of course, is the unique war mode that's being planned and will be introduced during the beta next year. It's essentially a high risk guild versus guild PvP system where your guild can take control of entire zones and occupy a zone, gaining unique and specific resources and benefits for controlling and contesting any of the areas in the game. Um, with the war mode interactions between guilds, it becomes more like a game of Risk or an even bigger scale game like Dungeons and Dragons at that point, because the level of flexibility and impact that players can have on the world during these battles is going to be reflected in patch updates. So let's say, for example, if a Horde guild wanted to attack the Thandal Span Bridge, and they put in enough time and effort and resources, and the Alliance were unable to defend it, I would be able to actually just destroy the bridge itself on the map. And then Alliance players would have to find a way around, you know, swimming up along the coast. And obviously it would be more inconvenient, so there's more incentive for the players to fight back. And it creates these engaging player-driven battles where groups of players can decide exactly what they want to do to influence the game world around them.
Okay, so with that, let's move into the PvP and talk about that. So you were talking about zones that players can fight for, control, occupy. Will they be zones that already exist in the world?
Yes, every zone, there's, I think, 44 in total, specifically in vanilla, and in Wallcraft, there's a few more, considering Gilla Jim's Island and the island of Dr. Lapidus and the Wandering Isles. Approximately about 50 zones in total in the game. The lower level zones, the starting zones, basically zones under level 20, are going to always be held by that specific race or faction, but anything else is going to be fair game to contest and control in war mode. What it means to contest or control a zone is essentially like a PvP flag objective of sorts, where there's going to be predefined areas throughout the entire zone, such as Western Plaguelands, for example, where Hearthglen will be able to be taken control of by any guild competing in war mode, and all the NPCs in that entire area, the Scarlet Crusade NPCs in that area will become friendly or at least neutral for your guild, and you'll have access to a bunch of different resources throughout the whole zone, um, which will help bolster and boost your guild as you progress through the content of the server. Now, obviously, this is war mode, so it's PvP driven. This is high risk PvP modes, and other guilds can come and contest your control of that zone by essentially capturing the base. Now, it's got a long spin timer, so you're gonna have to spend some time fighting for it if you want to capture another guild's base. But being able to kick a guild out of a zone is going to be very important because different layers of progression throughout vanilla WoW are essentially locked behind different grinds, and controlling these zones during crucial times throughout your progression will help advance your guild exponentially. We're talking a zone like Searing Gorge would have access to an extra 100, perhaps even 200 dark iron ore per hour. That means after a week of controlling Searing Gorge, your guild will have enough fire resistance gear to clear Molten Core because you'll have enough material for it, whereas otherwise, it would take much longer. So there's intrinsic benefits to gaining control of these zones, and to control them, you have to compete against other players, and it creates this endless cycle of struggle, diplomacy, tactics, um, sneak attack overnight to claim a zone. You'll have people logging in, getting the Discord notifications, or our guild base is under attack, come defend it. We need these resources for the raid next week. Stuff like that is really what makes an MMO experience magical, because it's not predefined, it's player driven.
And then following up with the PvP, so you're saying that what types of, you said war mode and all, and taking care of that. We were talking when you were giving me the tour, which that episode is yet to come out, but it will come out soon. How you were saying how there's going to be like whole zones that will be like for many, many, many players. I've even seen some footage that you sent me, and I've seen from other YouTubers of like a battle royale esque kind of battling and stuff like that between the players. Open war zones. Can you elaborate more on the types of PvP besides just controlling zones?
Yes, essentially, the original design and development of many of the battleground systems in World of Warcraft, going all the way back to Alpha, was intended to be open world. A lot of the roots of World of Warcraft are based in older MMOs like Ultima and EverQuest, where there was no instancing. Everything was out in the open world. And I think that that was a system that was put to the side in favor of instancing for the sake of convenience, especially when you're dealing with it on a mass scale. It's very tedious as a developer to deal with any problems associated with not having enough room, or, different issues that arise with griefing and stuff. Whereas on a smaller private server, you have the luxury of having a smaller community that's more radical in a sense, to where they want these systems implemented and featured because that allows them to have a better power stake over their claim on the territory, or their power level within the community is also a factor in this scale. So to have systems that a player can impact the world with is extremely important, and having zones like battlegrounds is really one of the ways to really flex your power for PvP in the game. But the open world should really be the battleground. And Blizzard, as I said, originally intended for battlegrounds like Alterac Valley to essentially be open world zones where you would fly in from either Undercity or Ironforge from the flight masters there, and they would just drop you off into the battleground. And there was no player limits, there was no player cap. The battleground was designed to be so difficult that it would take a force of 100 to 200 people even to push an objective. So realistically, you wouldn't be winning a battleground within an hour or a day or even a week. It would be a long, drawn out conflict that could even take months between objectives. And depending on how hard players fought and how equal the sides were. Um, but I think that that's a concept that was really neglected because the sake of having an easy system that was essentially a treadmill was better for business for Blizzard. So instead of having like these huge engaging conflicts, it was better to have people queue into a 40-man battleground 5 times a day and then get their honor and do that 7 days a week for 2 years because that keeps them on the treadmill. That keeps them playing the game in a very um, measurable way. Whereas these emergent systems, they give players the power and benefit to really decide the grind themselves. What is your goal? What is your objective? What power comes from that? Some people um, they might want to go into a battleground and they might want to basically harvest resources to boost the NPC's power level, and that's their interest. Which is something that Alterac Valley tried to capture on but couldn't complete because of the battleground structure to it. So when you had stated that you had toured the open world PvP zones and seen some footage of that, that was done on the Everlook PTR, and that was essentially to recreate the original open world battleground feeling, where I turned the old Hillsbrad Foothills zone, which is part of the default vanilla client, into a giant open world battleground zone for Horde versus Alliance. And I had staged different objectives, and each week I would have an event where players would have to basically either acquire some specific item from the zone or go fight off other players or contest and control specific locations within Old Hillsbrad. Um, all these different events each week that would have different variants and different goals kept players engaged on a PTR. And we had, at one point, we had about 400 people coming on every weekend just to play the events because these big open world battleground scenarios were the exact fix that they were looking for from the game. And it didn't feel like a grind. You didn't feel like I need to do this 7 more times until I have my weapon. For them, it was a big battle that they would constantly progress just playing. And the playing was the enjoyable part because there really wasn't a specific goal besides whatever we decided to make the goal that week. So and that was the players' decisions to drive those interactions and what the goal really would be.
Yeah, I think Blizzard attempted again to do that kind of stuff with the war fronts, which on paper sounded amazing. It's just the execution was absolutely terrible, and the fact that there was no PvP option. But from what it sounds like you're planning to do, it sounds like it's building on what the original intent of Alterac Valley was to be, and just make it better, make it more like Warcraft inside of World of Warcraft, which I'm all for. But let's move away a little bit from the PvP. Let's talk about some other stuff. So, how about this one right here, player housing. So, I've already showed off a little bit of the Night Elven player housing, and my video on Monday just came out of Ironforge, where it's not fully implemented, but you were saying how a lot of the areas in the upper areas of Ironforge will be player housing. Can you elaborate on how it will work on your server?
Yes. Just one sec.
Yeah, sure.
I'm falling to my death right now because there's no terrain for me to stand on. I have to teleport somewhere. Yeah, let me go to Ironforge. Yeah, I'm glad that you took a look through the Alpha Ironforge. Alpha Ironforge, for anyone who hasn't checked it out, is implemented in Wallcraft and will be the default Ironforge version. There's tons of empty rooms, so tons of empty buildings within the city because it's about twice as big, that are unoccupied by NPCs. Now, throughout the game world, everybody finds these locations where they're just uh, decoration more so or less. They don't really have any stringent lore tied to it. They don't have any specific owner within the game that's canon. So these houses just sit empty, and they've sat empty for 20 years. So I thought to myself, why should it be like that? Why should houses just sit empty when there's all these players around that don't have a home? And the idea really sprung from there. And everybody's thought about it. Everybody's thought, oh, this is my home. And perhaps most people have at some point even RP'd where they go and log out at some building out in the game world and that's their home. Well, it doesn't have to be just fantasy. It can be part of the game intrinsically. And that's the plan with the player housing systems. Many houses are created from scratch by myself. Many of them are new. There's essentially three types of different houses in the game. All of them are functionally the same. The level of detail really provided for the house is just the variant for these three types. But I'd like to discuss all three first so I can give a little bit of a better overview. Houses are going to function as a place for players to return to after a day of adventuring, to where they can recoup from their injuries, where they can gain much needed rest, and even access some special benefits that one would expect from having a personal house. The three types of houses that will be present in the game will be shared public housing as the first type. The second type will be pre-established locations within the game world that are unoccupied. And the third type will be fully custom house that is made by me from scratch to the player specification. Again, all three houses share the same type of benefits, but of course, with the first house, public housing, that's a way to accommodate all players on the server. I've decided that it won't be instance. It will simply be a large building, much like a garrison type structure, that is shared between any players of that specified reputation faction. So if you have exalted reputation with Darnassus, you can access the house over in Darnassus, the shared house, as a human. But all players will have access to the public housing from character creation onwards for their specific race. And these houses all provide the same benefits of offering rested experience while inside, much like an inn. They will have personal storage, which is essentially a way to access your final bank slot, which likely will be sequestered in some way to have a private storage system. A few different benefits like food and water, which will spawn throughout the day, allowing you to gain these resources very easily to combat hunger and thirst. They'll have a bed where you can lay down to combat exhaustion. And as well, they'll have several different amenities, such as potentially trophy stands and different decor features to make it feel a little bit more like home and reflect your achievements from within the game. Um, some of these things are subject to change just depending on the development cycle during beta, but that's the general outline of what a house will do for a player. Now, of course, players are very interested in the open world housing, and a lot of people want their own house. So I've made it possible for players to obtain almost any abandoned and unused location within the game directly and trade it between other players. So essentially, every house that's currently in game that's unoccupied will be reviewed for flagging for a player house, and if it fits the qualifications to make it into a player house, it will be dressed up and touched up to have all the amenities of a player house. And then very likely for the initial houses, I'll have a tax system where essentially you can purchase a house for approximately 2,000 to 3,000 gold, depending on the location. And every month you will have a recurring tax essentially to own the property. And that makes sure that the players who might not log back in aren't forever holding property hostage. But then players who own these properties will be able to trade them between each other, essentially forming a player-driven real estate market within the game. So property is going to be very valuable. And since it's a first come, first served basis in that regard, each fresh iteration of Wallcraft will essentially just be an up for grabs pool for the first players essentially who buy these. Now, of course, the custom houses are handmade by me. There can only be one per zone, so a maximum potential of 50 custom houses. And custom houses offer the same benefits and features as other houses. However, they're made to specification based on a player's request. These houses do take between 4 to 10 hours, depending on the location, to bake. They're very time consuming, and they're offered to Patreon supporters as essentially a way to give them a little bit more unique feeling in the game, um, and help garner support for the project. So it's a very, very, very clear declaration as well. I'll never have a cash shop, so this is the only way really to fund the project is cosmetic custom houses. These are only being offered up and up until the end of the beta, just simply because I don't know how much time I'll actually have to make new houses for players during live launch. So if you're interested in getting a custom house, you can sign up for the Patreon and you'll have one made that will persist all the way through and into fresh, obviously. So as a way to reserve it and help fund the project a little bit. But that's the three types of player houses. They're all functionally the same, but there is another type of housing structure as well in the game. And that's clan halls. Clan halls are going to be for your guild. All the names are obviously just working titles, subject to change. So, but the clan halls will offer more amenities and resources for you than a normal player house would. But they're acquired by a guild. There's a limited amount of space in the game world, essentially for guilds to acquire and place these houses. I will place them in any specified zone that a guild wants, but obviously the zone has to be under their control, um, at least canonically. And though the guild bases won't be like war mode bases where they can be contested or captured by opposing players, there will be a upkeep fee as well, much like a player house. So it will be categorically more expensive, but as a guild hall, it will offer more features that are guild oriented. Stuff like group summoning stones, portals, things like that that your guild can use when it's together, to help facilitate better raiding experience. But those essentially are the three types of player housing plus the guild halls. If there's any further questions, just leave them in the comments. I'm always happy to address them. A lot of players are very interested in the custom player houses. Just know that we do have a queue right now. I still have 3 more to make before I'll be able to get to any, but I'll try and have them all implemented before the beta launches, so we can focus more on development and beta by then.
All right. Now, at one point in that, you said in order to get food and water. And as people see right here, I have 2 debuffs. One says hunger and one says thirst. And the reason is because Wall has implemented a survival system inside of his server. So, what else would you like to talk about on the survival system within the server?
Yes, the world of Wallcraft is a much more dangerous place. It's much more dangerous for players, and in terms of not just the enemies or the other players they would be facing, but the world itself. Um, Original systems that were scrapped from the drawing board early on in WoW's development cycle were systems like negative rested, which was exhaustion, where you essentially your experience would decrease if you weren't resting occasionally. Thirst, hunger were proposed systems that were going to be implemented in the game, and uh, it's a mechanical reason as to why eating and drinking work the way that they do functionally in vanilla WoW is because they are essentially remnants of these systems that were scrapped. Um, Various weather effects like cold, heat, rain, sandstorms, and planned future ones that are not implemented yet, but things like miasma or various locust swarm type effects that will appear, kind of like a weather decal UI, but you'll take repeated damage from. Um, there's a lot of different weather systems and negative effects in the game that a player will have to deal with, but every one of these has a solution or a counter. So as long as you're paying attention to your surroundings and just making sure that you're staying alert and prepared, you shouldn't have any issues as a player. However, for the unprepared, And for those who venture out in the world in a dangerous location without taking the necessary preparations, you will definitely suffer. Things like cold, they stack up very quickly, reducing all of your stats. And once you reach 100 stacks, you'll just instantly die. Same thing goes for hunger, thirst. Every progressive stack that you have for hunger decreases your health regeneration by 10% up to 10 stacks. Once you reach 10 stacks, you will perish. For thirst, every stack of thirst decreases your power regeneration rate up to 100% at 10 stacks, at which point you will perish. So these effects are very detrimental, but they're also very easily countered. Um, these debuffs have a static apply timer of 10 minutes per stack, and the timer resets every time you drink or eat for the respective debuffs, and all stacks are cleared upon drinking and eating. So as long as you're taking a sip of food or taking a sip of water or eating a bite of food every 10 minutes, you shouldn't have to worry. There are a few effects that do have multipliers for them, such as heat or certain zones. They have higher heat indexes, meaning your thirst will accumulate faster than normal. The most notable one being Molten Core, which has a heat index of 5 compared to the standard heat index of 1, meaning your thirst multiplies 5 times as quickly, well within Molten Core. A few other zones have heat indexes between 2 to 4 as well, such as Ragefire Chasm being a 2, or Tannerus being a 3, Searing Gorge being a 4. Many of these zones, though, you'll notice the heat effects, and they're pretty obvious. There's 10 in total, so any zone that seems like it might be a hot zone, just make sure you bring a little bit of extra water.
I'm actually
For
heading to
the other
Daenerys right now. Is it implemented already?
Oh yes, yes. Right now you're in Shimmering Flats here, so the heat index would be a 2. Once you get to Tannerus, I think it raises to a 3. You should be all right. Just know that your thirst will tick up every 3 minutes or so.
Is there going to be visual way to say that it's a warmer zone versus a normal zone, like a buff that you could see, like how you would see the food and water buff up by the mini map?
I'll likely include a debuff. I just want to make sure that I have the debuff systems packaged neatly because otherwise I'll end up with, 10 debuffs simultaneously from weather effects. So anything that I think I can get away with out explicitly telling the players, I will. One of the recent additions was the lightning storm indicator. And this was an argument that I've had between several players for quite some time. People have been saying, hey, the lightning storm just randomly killed me. I didn't know that it was going to kill me. Can you add some sort of visual debuff for it? And I would argue back saying, it's raining out. You should know that it's going to lightning strike you because it only strikes when you're outside in the rain. So, that should be something that you should know. But enough players complain about it to the point where I'm just like, okay, I'm just going to implement the visual icon to let people know. For the heat indexes, I think the thirst debuff itself is enough of a clear indicator. It does increase more rapidly, so you'll definitely notice that your thirst is going up. So trying not to explicitly give information away because the original style of RPGs and MMOs in particular was exploration and learning about the game. And I've already had plenty of people tell me, "Oh, you need to publish a full list of all the rare spawns that you added with their locations and their loot drops." And I say, "Why?" They say, "Well, how am I going to know where they are?" And I say, "Go find them. That's your job to go find them." So some things need to be kept a mystery from players. I think as long as it's not a major inconvenience to not know, it's better to leave it up to a little bit more of the senses or common sense at least.
When it comes to like the weather effects and stuff, like there are ways to deter it. As I saw you say that there will be like a mask you could wear to help negate the effects of a sandstorm, or you can hide under a tent for rain and stuff like that. But people want to have that danger, but also not want to be completely halted in their progression. So having like the sandstorm mask, which would negate like maybe half of the effect or all of the effect or whatever it is. It doesn't matter too much. Uh, in terms of the thunderstorm, there is a chance for it to kill you, like lightning comes. But I think having a visual cue, so like a AOE glowy thing on the ground, be like, you got 2 seconds to move or your ass is toast, because that keeps people on their toes, but the world is still dangerous and they know, shit, I gotta keep my eyes out open because it's, thunderstorming out. So I feel like having a little bit of a visual to kind of, tell players like it's dangerous out there, but still making it up to them to, are you gonna move out of the lightning strike or not? Or are you gonna put the sandstorm mask on or not? Or bring water, bring food, warming clothes, whatever it is? It's still up to them. It's just giving them like a, hey, watch out kind of thing, if you understand what I'm saying.
No,
Yeah.
I totally feel that. If there was no indicators, then I would add one. But the indicator being that it's raining, um, should be an indicator enough, at least in my opinion. So it's like people who have a smartwatch. They tell them when it's raining outside when they can just look up and see the rain hitting them in the face.
Is it raining? I
Stuff
don't
like
know.
that. Yeah, exactly. Like lightning can only strike you while it's raining. There is now an aura indicator for when it's raining out. Um, I don't know why people wanted that, but I added that just because it was just too many complaints to deal with. So
It
I
might
don't
be
know.
a it might be
Like
a visual
for other
thing.
things, yeah, maybe I thought maybe about like if they had their visuals turned down to where they couldn't see the rain, but I turned down all
Yeah.
my settings and I tried. It appeared just fine on the screen, so it
Uh,
wasn't more so. I don't think it was a complaint that people were dying because they couldn't see the rain. I think it was a complaint that people were dying because it started raining and they forgot that this system was in place, and then they died, and then they were playing Death's Trial and they lost all their gear and they got upset. So they DM me on Discord asking me to change it so they stop dying. Um, which again is like one of those things where as a developer, I have to be the bad guy sometimes. Like I have to be the guy who makes the monster that kills you. You know, I have to be the guy that adds these mechanics that they shouldn't feel inconvenient at any point, and they shouldn't feel cumbersome. They should feel engaging, and they definitely should feel dangerous because that sense of danger and routes to combat them, like you said, with the mask completely counters sandstorms. So the trade-off is obviously you can't wear a head slot. If you're wearing a tier set, you won't be able to wear your full complete tier set if it's sandstorming. You won't be able to wear a rocket helmet or a mind control helmet or anything like that. Uh, for the shelter, for the tents, when you set up a tent, it will last 30 minutes and it grants you sheltered, which is aura that protects you from rain. So you can't be struck by lightning. So if you're out in a rainstorm or a rainy area and you have to go quest and you have to go kill mobs and stuff, you want to make sure that you're bringing a tent along and you're setting up your tent to, get out in the game world like that. So protecting yourself and being prepared is really the most crucial thing. And being aware of your surroundings and understanding your surroundings, it's it's part of what makes games engaging. If the game just has no threat, has no danger, and essentially plays itself, what's the point then? There's enough games like that out there, and they really don't do that well. They just have people, mindlessly clicking maybe 2 times a day while they try and entice them into their microtransaction shop or whatever they're trying to sell these people. It's not good gameplay. It's not good game development, at least. I look at games like Dwarf Fortress as some of the pinnacle of gaming because the player's choices are limitless in that sense, and there's so many different nuances that are added as the systems, but the systems don't control the player. The player controls the systems. That should always be the goal. So the player has to have a route to interact with the system, which, like you said, with the different survival pieces to counteract them. As long as the players have a way of detecting them through their senses, be it difficult or easy, some cases possibly even difficult, like traps, you might not be able to see until you're too close and it's too late. Um, or weather systems where you look around and you can see it's snowing or you can see the sandstorm. you can see that it's, raining out. For heat, I think bringing it back to the heat thing, I think that it would be good to have a visual indicator that it's a hot zone, but I think that since the heat is static and doesn't ever change, it's not necessary in that regard, just because those zones, they don't fluctuate at all. There's no difference. Once you're in there, you know the heat. Um,
Well,
so,
I think it would be like I'm about to go into Ungoro Crater. Now, I can assume that it's probably hot and humid, but other people might be like, "Oh, well, it's a tropical jungle. How hot could it be?" So it's like, okay, so is it on the level 3 or 4 scale like Tenaris, or is it on the 2 scale? Like, it's more of how hot is it? We'll have to figure it out. But other than that, I mean, I completely agree with everything you're saying, and yeah, you are right about those players. They're just mad that they got killed.
yeah, I'm not going to blame them. I've had a lot of testers and stuff say the same thing in recommendation. A lot of even other developers where they're like, it would be better for the players. So it's an understandable point. Um, I think it boils down to the sense of discovery, and I think it boils down to the sharing of information and knowledge, which brings back to the point where people demanding that I tell them where rare spawns are. I'd rather add visual indicators to everything than tell people where stuff is, but I'd rather do neither, because I want people to be able to make these discoveries and have it be unknown by everyone else, really, and then they can share the information, and then the information spreads throughout the community, and that right there is kind of like the community building experience that uh almost all games have at their onset, but later on becomes more known. Everything becomes data mined, everything becomes known, so there really is no mystery at that point. And default vanilla, you know how everything works in default vanilla, where everything is, all the timers for everything. So having that mystery is really, I think, crucial. Um, for things specifically like the weather, it falls within the same vein, but obviously I'm much more willing to make quality of life changes for players based on feedback than anything else.
Okay, now let's move a little bit from there. So, real quick, because this was a question asked by somebody in my chat, will there be transmog?
No, I have no plans for Transmog, and that is another question that's commonly asked. And again, everybody has their little features and flavors that they'd like to see in the game. That's their personal preferences, but vanilla never had transmog, and Wallcraft won't have transmog for that purpose. I think vanilla has a very distinct art style. I think being able to look at a player and see what they're wearing and what they have equipped and immediately recognize their power level is very, very important for world PvP engagements. Because you're not just working off a standard template where you can assume everyone has this season's gladiator gear or what the standard PvPer would look like. There's so much more variance, but the variance is rooted in iconic design that's recognizable by all players. So transmog totally defeats that. It ruins the idea of power and visual aesthetic. And people say, well, I don't want to wear a clown suit. Well, fortunately for you, Wallcraft has tons of item restats and better optimization to the point where you probably will be wearing a matching gear set in Priebus and all the way through. And I don't mean just item sets, but the gear pieces match better because the items are better. So, I can be wearing the blue dress forever. You don't have to worry about things like that or looking ugly. There's a lot of iconic gear that should be worn together, that would look good together, that just doesn't have a chance to be because it's not meta or it's not best. Whereas in Wallcraft, that changes. You don't have to worry about that.
Okay. So, how about horizontal progression? Because I know you say you're planning on making more content for post Nax, what about content for while you're leveling, or even parallel to Zul'Gurub, for an example?
Yes, I would like to expand more so of each tier of content. I would like each tier to have a 20 man, a 40 man, and an open world zone associated with it, or at least with that tier. Um, Caverns of Time is currently open in Wallcraft. It uses the original Caverns of Time model as well, which was very nice. I went through and opened it up with Blender taking off the front door there. So you go into Caverns of Time and you have the three wings, and obviously the thought should be, well, these three things should all be interconnected somehow, and it needs to be some sort of tier of content. And typically, you'd like to have a battleground associated with that as well. There's a few missing pieces of that puzzle within default vanilla though that can definitely be filled out, and that's really my next step and goal for PvE is to fill out those missing pieces of content. So when we're referring to that, we can say if I were to call out tier 4 content, that's going to be Karazhan, and you're going to have the Karazhan Crypts, which will be an open world PvP zone. You'll have Karazhan 20, which will be the TBC version of Karazhan. You'll have Karazhan 40, which is the original alpha Karazhan model. And then as well, you'll have one additional wing of the Caverns of Time. That will be an open world PvP event zone. So, and again, that would be the Black Morass to be specific. Um, there's a lot of gaps in content though in vanilla WoW, and that was early development cycle had to scrap a lot of content for time, and they ended up including them in later expansions. But in particular, for the leveling experience and the leveling journey, I would like to add more content. It's just not primarily the focus because most of that content only gets done once or twice during a standard playthrough of 1 or 2 years by a player. So leveling content and content that you level through would be a much lower priority. It will happen one day, but during the beta, that's not going to be a priority for development.
Okay. One question that I actually missed, going back to the world and survival and all that kind of stuff. You spoke to me when we were doing our uh walkthrough on how you want a lot more interactable items in the world. It's similar to RuneScape. Um, I was wondering, would you go as far as to make them similar to what, for an example, the Shinobi Story server is doing, where it's more like what's it called, Timeless Isle? Like there's bushes out in the world that you can open up like a treasure chest system. You can open them up and you could find just berries and herbs, and most of it's kind of like vendor trash, but the berries you could eat and it would recover health, or you could use it in cooking recipes and all that kind of stuff. Like, how far are you willing to go with that system?
Things like that, I would love to greatly expand upon. I'd love to have every single asset that's part of a map object. I would love to have everything be interactable. Um, the realism of that is there. I do have systems like the way that the survival woodcutting works. I could assign that to a lot of different functions to detect map objects that are, game objects. So like a bottle that would be sitting there, part of the map itself, could be detected by the client and the server as a bottle that the player is looking at or clicking on. So there's different routes to that, and I would like to have obviously everything be interactable if possible, but the realism of the scope of that type of work would lead to a lot of blank items. So what I'd like to do though is fill out the game with a lot more secrets, a lot more Easter eggs, a lot more interactables, a lot more items and objects that you can click on in the game world that do things, that give you things that are specific and unique, a lot more crafting recipes, a lot more engaging crafting recipes too, where it's not just 2 ores and a chunk of metal to make something. More intricate patterns that would take much greater time to craft, but have an equal power level, deserving. So systems like that that offer replayability and engagement are a much higher focus in the development cycle. As I am one person, the realism of adding a new WMO made from scratch in Blender. If I were to do that myself, it would take months and months for something that would be one and done for most people. But a system like a world building system or a crafting system or an expansion to previous skills that can offer, 20, 30, 40, maybe even 50 hours of content on, a standard play cycle. Things like that, much more worthwhile for both me and players to develop. So I would love to expand on them. I would say that's probably like top 5 list of priorities. That's probably number 4. Tons of expansion already within the game. I would say in my estimates, probably about new 500 items in total. Obviously 2 new professions, jewel crafting and inscription. Survival is the third one, but those 3 professions were originally intended for the development cycle for vanilla. Anything else after that would really be a new creation. And the next skill planned is woodworking. Tons of new recipes and designs for that. That includes being able to craft your own ships, massive warships too, that will take, hundreds of hours for a guild to make and be able to go plunder out on the high seas. Things of that nature, but also, bucklers, arrows, even just smaller fishing boats that can be crafted pretty easily by players. Um, various features and quality of life implementations through these skills that have long lasting impact, especially like survival, where you have things like camouflage and forager and the weather survival stuff. Um, those things, they just offer way more engagement for players in the long term. So I'd love to do more with that.
Um, he said something, and I'm trying to remember what it was. I was gonna ask a question on it. Oh darn, I'm blanking right now.
Yeah, I'm rambling a little bit on that, but
No,
I love talking about Wallcraft and future plans.
yeah, you said something good, and I wanted to ask a question. I'm blanking all of a sudden, but I don't know, it may or may not come back to me. So somebody in the YouTube chat right here is asking, is there any plans for custom dungeons? I guess I'm gonna expand upon that, both for low level or high end dungeons.
Um, yeah, that's something that we had touched upon. I would love to add more dungeons for low level zones. I think that that's more like I think that's a Turtle WoW kind of philosophy thing where, oh, we'll add this new level 35 dungeon that players can enjoy, because those types of desires are for more sentimental value. But in terms of practicality, would I be better off adding a dungeon in a low level zone but make it a level 60 dungeon, to where players can just go to that zone at level 60 and do it 20 times instead of twice while they're leveling for the quests or maybe an extra piece of gear? Um, if I were to do things like that, I'd rather focus on retooling dungeons to have a level 60 hard mode or a heroic mode for, level 60 playthroughs, and retuning all the content for that. The difficulty in designing new content, if you'll notice where other projects do uh, new dungeons, typically it's not done in an indoor environment because that requires editing giant building models in Blender, and that takes a lot of skill and a lot of time. And if I were to have people doing that for me on a paid basis, it would take a lot of money basically to get maps like that. So in terms of development, it's just not practical. If it was, I'd be more apt to do it. I could do outdoor type dungeons where you'll notice on most servers they'll have like, especially lower level content that they don't want to spend 6 months working on, just for a structure or a building. You can make it outdoors in a map editor in the course of 2 days and have something that's fun and engaging and playable. Um, I would love to do that, but the pressing reason is, why should that be given to players who are low level? There's no practical reason for it for most players. It's nice to visit upon something new while leveling, which I'd rather implement through quests or even new zones. New zones be a fun thing because that's a little bit more practical. There's later on replayability. But if a dungeon isn't going to be playable at level 60, for some sense, without some sort of gimmick item being the reason to go visit it, it's just not really worthwhile to do. Later on dungeons, a level 45, maybe a 50 dungeon, that's more practical. That's something that players can at least go repeat throughout the entirety of their playthrough for whatever reason.
Trying to get into the Caverns of Time. Uh... oh, Sandstorms kicking up. Oh yeah, there's a debuff here. Blinding Sands. Sweet. But I'm going inside Caverns of Time now, so...
Yeah, you'll be protected from that. The Blinding Sands debuff is brutal. You can't hit. You have 50% less hit chance with spells and attacks. So trying to fight people while unprepared in a sandstorm is very, very impossible. And I've had a few fights in Silithus while harvesting dust with other people when there was no protection implemented yet. So we were fighting for 20 minutes, couldn't kill each other because none of us could hit.
Pocket sand. Okay, so I got two more questions written on my paper here. If anybody in the chat watching currently has a question, ask it now. When I'm done with these couple of questions, I'll check and see if anybody's got some good ones to ask Wall. But first one, this would probably be an easy one. Do you have plans for any custom races or classes?
Yes, in the future. That's not a priority right now because the biggest priority is the world systems. Once the world systems are all established in place, then I'll have time to look at things like new dungeons, new races, new classes. But I can absolutely guarantee you, yes, there will be new races. Yes, there will be new classes. There's currently two that are playable. You can play as Goblin and you can play as Ogre. They have the full animation kits. Well, mostly, about 90% there. So if the models were totally up to par for what I'd expect from vanilla models for players, then I would have them playable in game for players. But up until the models are ready to go, then that's not going to be totally feasible just because I don't want it looking bad. But either way, the Ogre and the Goblin will be playable races. Those are absolutely confirmed, along with High Elf and Scourge. Those are all confirmed, absolutely. The other ones have models that are essentially not, again, up to par with players. So Gnolls, Murlocs, Nagas, things like that. They're not really suitable for players. If I have models that are suitable for players, then the story changes. I have them in the game files as a developer or as even a GM. I can play as a Naga right now if I wanted to, but just because I couldn't mount, I can't equip armor visually. It just doesn't really work for players. But in terms of that, in terms of new classes and new races on Wallcraft, yes, there will be new classes. Yes, there will be new races. They will be implemented in a unique fashion. It's not going to be simply go on the main character selection and choose an ogre or a goblin. The way that you unlock these new races, and I'll describe the systems regarding these new races, the way that you unlock them, the benefits, the gameplay. So essentially, you have a few new types of categories for playable characters of different races. There will be no new alliance or no new horde races in particular, because that lore-wise doesn't really make sense. Within the vanilla game world, the alliance and the horde are very well defined. The races that people tend to add onto the alliance, which is high elf or blood elf, even for horde, and goblin for horde typically. Those were never alliance nor horde races. Those were always third faction races, which is how I fully intend to implement them on Wallcraft. So a good example is a rubric that describes the hostility towards alliance and the hostility towards horde as a race. Some races are considered wild in that they are hostile towards everyone else outside of their own race, such as gnolls or quillboars or murlocs. Some races are hostile to the alliance but neutral to the horde, such as ogres. Some races are hostile to the horde but neutral to the alliance, such as high elves. And goblins in particular are neutral to both alliance and horde. So their gameplay loop for these different races functions differently than a traditional one of the 8 original races. Um, your focus isn't going to be on endgame raiding, but more so open world interaction. The exception being the Goblin will be able to group with both Alliance and Horde players and perform all the raids and whatnot with them. Uh, and High Elf and Ogre, pending, being able to raid, but for the other wild races, you obviously can't group with other players. So for a Knoll, you wouldn't be able to clear content in Molten Core or Blackwing Layer or anything like that. The gameplay though for these wild races is radically different than traditional. If you're playing a playable Knoll or a Murloc, your gameplay objectives are to essentially be a Knoll or be a Murloc. With a Knoll in particular, you could even say, for a Knoll, you would be hanging out in Knoll zones and just kicking the piss out of players, basically. Scourge, especially Scourge, a little bit of description of their gameplay. Uh, when you complete Naxxramas on your main character, you'll have the option to create a Scourge character. A Scourge character will essentially be restricted to one of 3 unique classes, and those classes are reflected within the display model. So you'll have like a Lich that will be more so a caster type. You'll have the Abomination that will be more so a tank type, and you'll have the Ghoul or a Skeleton Knight that will be more so melee DPS. And these Scourge characters are restricted to the Plague Lands. They won't be able to survive outside of the Plague Lands, and if they stray too far, they will instantly perish. Um, and they're hostile to both Alliance and Horde. They have no real quest objectives. They do have systems in place, though, to offer progression, such as killing players will earn you essence that can be used to empower your character. Um, but each of these wild races, and 8 in total, I should say, each of these wild races essentially offers a unique variant of traditional gameplay. Um, as I stated too, like some of them can do content. The goblins, they are neutral with both Alliance and Horde. They have lower trade prices with the Goblin auction house, so they're able to use the Goblin auction house freely. They have the same rates for using the Alliance and Horde auction houses as well. So, as a Goblin player, um, you would be more apt to spend your time even going between Ogrimmar and Ironforge and just trading goods off the auction house and making a lot of money. And a lot of people, I'm sure, will have Goblin alts where they log onto the Goblin just to go trade and play the auction house and make money. Um, and that's thematic of the Goblins' play style is that they're very unscrupulous, they're shysters and swindlers, and they're willing to play any side of the allegiance for profit. So the gameplay should reflect that. It shouldn't just be a traditional reskin of an orc that has a different racial ability. That's stale gameplay, and Blizzard offered that with TBC adding new races just because that was the system that they had defined. But with Wallcraft, we're bringing it back to the drawing board on the original designs, and we're taking it to a much better approach, in my opinion.
Well, it sounds like it, if the system itself was fleshed out, it definitely sounds interesting from just having a unique, different type of gameplay experience, or even just a roleplay experience. Because, like you said, with the Scourge, like only really being in like let's say Lordaeron, because that's where the Scourge are more prevalent. Like that'd be cool to just like hang around there and play as a Scourge attacking a Horde and Alliance. But would you offer also just gameplay that only they can access within that zone itself? Like Knolls can maybe go from camp to camp and they can interact with other Knolls, and maybe the Knolls themselves give them unique tasks or something to do. So you have some, it's not really you're trying to do
Yeah,
exactly what you're doing as a Tauren trying to get from 1 to 60 in raid. You're just, it's more of a role play, just fuck around kind of experience, you know what I mean? Because there's no way you could
yeah,
do everything as a Null if you're aggressive to the Horde and Alliance.
yeah, precisely. And that system is the exact plan, I should say.
Okay.
It's already in place for ogres. If, in fact, I'll even come in if you want to take a look what class. Log on a warrior real quick.
Okay, so I'm gonna log on to a warrior. Oop, there we go. So I'm gonna create a new character. I'm just gonna make an orc warrior real quick. Blah, blah, blah. That's my name. Oh, wait, you probably need my name. I just jumbled a bunch of letters.
Oh, you're fine. I'm at the orc starting area. Yeah, I have to convert your character. Let me just look it up so I don't mess it up, though. I can't remember what the ID for ogre is.
Oh, I'm in the room with Wall. The other Wall.
Oh, cool. Just hang there. I'll be right there.
Green jelly bean. I think your question is pretty much answered with my same question that I just asked him. He's basically asking, will there be progress for kobolds to go from like one mine to another and stuff like that?
So yeah, that's what I wanted to answer. For each of the wild factions, you will have your own unique style of gameplay. The progression from 1 to 60, if there is even any progression from 1 to 60 for the specified race, is totally unique to that race. And the gameplay is very thematic to the objective of the faction and the players within the faction for that race. As an example, as an ogre player, you would be able to unlock the ogre race by performing special feats within Dire Maul. Once you have the ogres unlocked within Dire Maul, you can basically become the king of the ogres. And through a rep grind with the ogres, you can eventually unlock ogres as a playable race. Once you make an ogre, your questing progression through the game is to unite the ogres and all the various scattered ogre tribes in a bid for supremacy. And if you understand the lore and the history of the ogres and really why they're here and how they got here, and their interactions with the Horde, they're not really too friendly with the Horde. They're basically a slave caste within the Horde, and because they're too stupid to really do anything about it, they just kind of do what they're told. They're very angry and prone to rage. They're very territorial. They prefer to be around other ogres. Well, the problem is that ogres fight amongst each other, and they can't really unite. So the orcs have always used this infighting to their advantage in order to control them, and use them as foot soldiers and slaves for laborers. You, as an ogre player, your goal and your whole story arc is to unite the ogre tribes. And once all the ogre clans are all united, you'll be able to basically stake a claim for dominance and hegemony within the horde. And having the ogres united and all the clans united by the player is the progression story arc for the ogre race entirely. So you have different quest chains that take you throughout the entire game world to different ogre regions. You'll talk to ogre leaders. You'll go have detailed dialogue options as well, not just the standard, vanilla WoW formula. Because I can implement better quests than WoW. Anybody can implement better quests than WoW. WoW quests are very cookie cutter and stale. So any custom quest will be detailed, very nuanced, much more like a Baldur's Gate quest than a World of Warcraft quest. But
I,
the ogre quest in particular,
I was gonna
I'm sorry, you gonna say something?
I was gonna say I found your Shrek reference.
Oh, the ogre panel.
Yeah.
Yo, yeah, here, let me invite you real quick. Come take a look at this. You as an ogre player, and you can see some of the problems is just like the geo sets for the pants. It's got some bad textures on the legs. So once the models are all fixed up, they'll be, accessible in game. But that won't be at launch. That will be probably a year after launch. Future plans for that. 1 second though, I take you there.
Yeah.
Say something in party chat because I don't want to type all that.
Oh, I don't even see party chat. Like it says I typed in party, but I don't see anything in party.
Okay, there we go. I think I got you. Yeah, there you go. You can go interact with all these ogres. Since you're an ogre, you're friendly to all the ogres in game.
Yay! Be my friend. Don't.
Yeah, you can go get the buffs right now from Dire Maul. You start as an ogre player. You start off in the Dire Maul wing for ogres, and likely it'll be some sequestered branch for that. Um, Possibly not even Dire Maul as a starting area. You might just venture to Dire Maul as an ogre player starting off, and progressing from 1 to 60 as one of these wild factions. Uh, the progress route is a lot more amplified. Basically, instead of having to do 1,000 quests to get to level 60, you'll have like 30 quests, and each of those quests will grant you basically a player level up. You can expect maybe like 20 hours to get to level 60 on a new race. So the grind isn't that long. The grind really is associated in unlocking them. To, for example, get the Goblin race unlock, you need to gain Exalted with all 4 Goblin factions from the Steamweedle Cartel. And that's a serious grind. Um, I have one player who's like halfway there so far, and he wants to have the first unlocked Goblin on Wallcraft. And he's been grinding on the alpha, killing blood cells. It's just been whack. But yeah, so it's not so much the new races, it's more so the idea of what factions enable you and what factions can enable for your account. Um, Alternatively, for the Goblin, some people might not care about the Goblin, but they do want a sick pirate ship. And if you get exalted with the Blood Sail, you might even gain access to the secret pirate island, somewhere out in the sea that they've been holding up in.
Plunder
So
Isle.
yeah, yeah, and there's tons of different options in terms of factions, where you have to choose between a side, obviously the Syndicate and Ravenholt or the Centaur clans. Obviously the Centaur clans are going to be pretty huge, especially with new recipes and stuff. So choosing a side for them is going to be pretty big. But like I said, the race unlocks. They're meant to be more so refreshing end game content that gives you a new angle and a take on the game. Um, for example, the High Elves, you need Exalted with Chandrilar to unlock. And all of these factions you can gain Exalted with, whereas previously you might have been stopped at neutral or friendly. Um, there's the Wildhammer Dwarfs, but there's also the Reventusk Trolls, which are in game. They were removed in patch 1.11, and most players aren't familiar with them as an actual faction in game. Most progressive servers don't have them as a faction. Um, but they're restored in Wallcraft. And the Wild Hammer and Reventusk Trolls will offer unique benefits and rewards to encourage world PvP in hinterlands, possibly even reskins for your troll or your dwarf. Reskins unlocked through faction grinds are always a very good treat for players and something to work for. So those things they're not super difficult to implement. They're very difficult to implement correctly. I could slap Nagas in the game and let them be playable without being able to mount or jump correctly with animations, but I want the game to look and feel good. So if it's not fully done, I don't want to implement it into the live game. And because the new playable races are a down the road experience, I'll just give you the plans and the details, but I can't give you any absolute guarantees on when they come. Just know that it will be after live launch.
Oh my gosh. The races themselves. Now, some of them you said there are going to be unlocked through reputation grinds. Some of them are just from doing something in particular, like you said with the ogres. Are there any that you don't really have to faction grind at all? Like you could just do something and you can unlock them?
Yes, like for example, the Scourge, you have to complete Nax Ramus, which obviously is itself, a
Yeah.
daunting task. But um, let's just say you had a fresh 60 that got carried through Nax Ramus within your first 2 weeks of playing the game, and you got the KT kill credit, you can unlock Scourge. So some of them will be a little bit easier, some of them will be a little bit more difficult. Some of them will be more so geared towards even mid-level, lower level content. Um, because again, it's not my goal to reject lower level content 360. I'd love to expand upon that, but I'd rather focus on world systems like this. So things like the Knoll and Murloc unlock would be able to be obtained by a player at like level 30. And although you can obtain them early, the progression within the actual gameplay for the races themselves might not particularly progress past the zones that they're really dedicated into. For example, a Knoll character might even have a level cap, a hard level cap of 30, so that you're basically relegated to, harassing players in lower level zones for fun. So stuff like that.
So probably the centaurs, like if we stuck to that, would probably be unlocked like, I don't know, let's say level 40 for around Desolates, because that's when all the major tribes are being like in the quest lines and stuff like that.
Yeah, and if you were to do the centaur grinds all the way to exalted, you could go from like if you were to start off in Desolus at like level 35, you can go all the way to like 45 to get to like exalted. So if you're willing to dedicate to the grind, you could unlock then maybe the centaur or the magrum and the gelkis. And the centaurs, if they were to be unlocked, might even have more so neutrality towards the alliance and horde. Very similar gameplay. Maybe even they have their own alliances, or they're just really particularly at war with the other centaurs. Um, Imagine that where the players, if you unlock the gelkis, or let's say you unlock the magrum centaurs, and you are a magrum centaur player, you were hostile towards the opposite centaur factions for uh, the Kolkar and the Gelkis and all that. So where any player for those factions, you could kill them and gain like a severed head trophy, and then you turn it in, and it gives you some really good, consumable pack, and then you can just transfer that, mail it off to your main. So if you need PvP supplies, you hop on your centaur character and just go kick the shit out of other centaurs for 2 hours a day. Stuff like that that keeps the gameplay engaging at all tiers and all levels. As long as if it has replayability to a high degree, I'm always willing to put time into it as a system.
Now I think this is going to be the last one for this topic, and then I got one last question before we wrap it up. But you were saying how, like, let's say for the ogres, for an example, to get from like 1 to 60, you were going to need like 30 quests to get level 60. So would those be more in-depth quests where it's similar to RuneScape? And I know you're a player of RuneScape, and to follow up that, would you also have more in-depth quests to just regular players wherever in the world or whatever, so it's like more God, I just did a video on this and I'm having a hard time explaining it.
Oh, I
Yeah,
totally
and
understand what you mean there.
where it's not just kill and collect 10 bear asses. It's more a whole story within just one quest where you're doing multiple stages of it at a time, and you have to collect certain things, do certain puzzles, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and that's exactly how I want the quest to really go. I think a good distinction to be made is that it's not just the objectives, the strict objectives of the quests of World of Warcraft. It's the sheer repetition for quests that have no significant meaning in any part. Basically, you go to like Badlands and yeah, you have a quest to kill 10 mountain lions for whatever reason, and you do the quest and then that's it. And
40
you just get the
coyote
experience.
jaws.
Yeah, you get a bunch of coyote jaws, and then you ask the guy, "What does he want these for?" And he goes, "Oh, no reason." And then he asks the next adventurer to do it, and that's where that leads. So, yeah, if you're to look at like a RuneScape quest, imagine a quest like Monkey Madness Part 2,
I
where it's
just
a
started that.
very yeah, it's a very fun quest, a very detailed, very long quest. I did it my first time with no guide when it came out either, so it was very fun exploring all of the dialogue and reading through it all and figuring it all out and then figuring out the puzzles myself. And that's really the heart of questing. I think RuneScape is the only MMO that actually does questing right. I don't really play any other MMOs, but from what I see, some people like Final Fantasy Quest because it's basically just like cinematics where you're just watching a story unfold.
At
But
that point, watch a
I,
movie.
I like the yeah, I don't like anime. I don't want to watch stuff. I want to interact with the world. So for me, it's like the quest should be engaging. If I'm gonna add new quests, I don't want to add just simple kill quests for no purpose. And that doesn't mean that new quests can't just be go here and kill this if if it has a purpose. But the problem is, as a developer, I've studied the game files to such a depth that I can absolutely assure you that basically the last the last year of production was Blizzard saying, all right, we need to fill this zone, start slapping stuff down. And so much of it came out as uninspired crap, but it was still fun and engaging because it was novel experience at the time. Looking back on it though, most of the quests, obviously they're total crap. There's no point to doing them. For me, I think that was the reason why, and I've only really played aside from V plus, I haven't really played any custom servers to base anything off of, but I played to like level 6 in Turtle WoW when it first came out, and there's like 50 people online. And I did like 10 quests and got less experience from them, and I realized I'm picking the same bucket of berries for no reason for less reward than normal. And it just like it pissed me off. And that's not a slight against the project because some people like that experience of being able to do everything in the game. But for me, vanilla lore is great, but the implementation of quests is not. So having to do quests for me is just total shit. Um, which is why on Wallcraft quests they reward significantly more experience, whereas mob kills grant less experience because you can do the quests then, and you don't need to do every quest, but you do a majority of the quests, and you're not having to particularly compete with other people for a ton of mob experience on the way to 60. So the leveling experience is smoother, and the questing experience is more enjoyable because you have more flexibility. I'd like to supplement that though. I'd like to supplement that with much more detailed quests, like yeah, like Monkey Madness 2 from RuneScape. That would basically be like the ogre quest arc, and the 30 quests in total would basically be like the sum of doing Monkey Madness 2, all the pre-quests and all the quests up until it, even though it's like obviously only like 7 quests in total on RuneScape. The quest length itself for the systems that WoW uses to handle quests, you can more so think of each quest as one step in the objective instead of like this overarching thing. So I consider quest lines to be more so akin to a single RuneScape quest. An entire quest line in WoW is more of an equivalent. And there's some quest lines that are great. There's like the Legend of Stalvin and some of the Iranicus stuff, which I finished on Wallcraft. The Sunken Temple gem quest for Iranicus is completed on Wallcraft, and like that, I think that's a great example. Is that quest has great purpose. It's 3 new quests that are added that tied the story together for a cliffhanger that was started 20 years ago and never resolved mistakenly, and left in game to the point where most people never even discovered it, and the ones who unfortunately did and default vanilla lost a trinket for no reason because the quest was incomplete. So like things like that, they should be completed. There's a quest in Darkshire on Wallcraft that sends you into the Ravenhill Crypts to fight a very difficult 5-man elite caster NPC. And the reward is a very nice offhand item for casters. And it's just a simple go here and kill this guy quest. But the quest's purpose is to tie the scenery and the terrain of the Duskwood Crypt's alchemy room and the laboratory that's in there to the general premise of what's happening in the zone and the lore of what's happening in the zone and exactly how things got to be the way that they are in Darkshire. So it kind of helps bridge a little bit of a gap that exists in the game's lore without having to have some intricate, flourishing storyline. It's just a single kill quest to go kill a guy, but it gives enough dialogue and enough story to tell you why the world is the way that it is. And that's the most important thing. And that's something that WoW quests just almost totally miss on. You know, the quest to kill 10 mountain cougars could be good if there was a reason for it, but there's never really or seldom.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, so I got one last question and then we'll do a wrap up. So this is from Ever Jr. on my Discord server. He wants to ask you, how do you feel about the vanilla WoW or private server community?
That's a tough one to summarize. It really is. It's varied. Um, it's kind of like having to describe an entire group with one term. It just doesn't really work, but you kind of have an idea. Uh, I love the people that I get to interact with every day. The developers, the people within the community, the people that I surround myself with. I love interacting with them, so I have no complaints there. Um, a huge shout out to people like Ever Jr., my boy Gamer, Britannia, Nolan, Reynolds Cahoon, Crow, like all the guys in the scene, TD, Grender, like just everybody. There's so many names of people that I'm appreciative of and I'm happy to interact with. Obviously, it's a private server community and it's a free bootleg copy of World of Warcraft that costs nothing to play. And basically people who are degenerate trash can afford and spend all day and night playing the game. So it attracts those people. Um, and you have a lot of problem people in the community who are just there just to create problems and create issues for entertainment. And so strife and discord. And those people are frustrating to interact with, but discounting the fact that there's a lot of obnoxious traits and flaws in people, the community as a whole is united behind probably the greatest game ever made. And that alone is enough to redeem them for their shortcomings. Being able to seriously commit and dedicate time to playing this game and love every minute of it isn't easy because people make it not easy. But that's the goal, is to just have fun and enjoy the game. And everybody wants that at the end of the day. That's really why we're here. So everybody has that kind of same shared interest and focus. And as long as the community just understands that not everybody's going to see eye to eye, everybody's going to disagree on things. People are going to have different visions and ideas of what they think is right and wrong. As long as people just understand that at the end of the day, it's just a game. We're just here to have fun, then it doesn't really matter. The community, of course, is pretty far away from fully understanding that, but I think it's definitely gotten better in the last year or 2 years, even. I would say in the last year. Um, People stopped really attacking other projects for no reason. They just started focusing on enjoying the projects that they enjoy. If you don't like it, don't play it. It's really that simple at the end of the day. And there's a lot of scumbags in the community because again the nature of the game or the nature of emulation in general. Um, but yeah, people always want to watch out for. But they expose themselves quickly enough, and then they're usually seldom a worry after. So, my suggestion to players is play projects to enjoy them and have fun. Don't play them just for a thrill or a rush on Fresh Week. I think that that's the most detrimental thing, not to the game itself, but to you as a player, is to amp yourself up just for the big 10,000 population launch. Turtle WoW has 20,000 people playing right now. I played when it first came out. It's the only time I've ever played, and I remember 56 people online, and I had made it to I think level either 6 or 11. I'd even made it past Elwyn into Westfall at the time, and I had fun on the server. I don't have a whole lot of time to just play play miscellaneous projects for the most part, but I wish I would have dedicated more time into it at the beginning to see it grow and see all the players slowly come in and enjoy the game fresh and anew. Not particularly my cup of tea in terms of gameplay, but seeing projects grow organically in that sense is a wonderful thing. And everybody should hope that for everybody's projects. Everybody should hope for the best. Um, as long as they're done with good intention. Some projects they're cash grabs or they're just out to make a quick buck or for whatever reason they're not done for the right intentions. But if the intention is to provide a good gaming experience from the game that we all love and know to the players, and your focus is on providing that, then good enough in my book. Um, if I were to make a single complaint For me, it's microtransactions. I hate microtransactions. I hate cash shops. I won't play a project with a cash shop. I understand it to an extent. People need to, put food on the table. And people, they treat this like an enterprise when it should be a passion project. Um, I'll never offer microtransactions or cash shops because it denigrates the integrity of the entire game. Once achievements and accomplishments can be obtained by swiping a credit card, nothing has value anymore. Um, so like I said, the only thing I'll ever do is custom houses, and that's because it's time out of my day to actually make custom houses. Um, not just cookie cutter copy paste things. But yeah, even that I'm not comfortable with. I want to remove that from the Patreon model and just move to like a flat monthly sub that offers you access to like the beta server and early testing for things or something like that. Just I like the model of Dwarf Fortress, and I think all private servers should strive to be like that. And anything that doesn't have that organic passion element to it, uh, it feels tainted, in my opinion. So I encourage players to always just be wary of predatory practices that are basically wearing the game as a cloak or a mask to trick them out of money. Um, but if you see developers putting in time and effort and work to make the game better or to make their projects more fun and enjoyable, then you can't hate them too much, if the effort's there and the labors are there. The final statement I'd really like to make in that regard, though, and I've rambled way too much here, so I'd like to stop rambling, is that people really need to stop with the nonsense on Discord and in other communities. That's pointless, and it's intended to stir drama, and we all know that the community runs on drama, so drama is really what's keeping the game alive, and you can't kill that off, because if you do, you will kill off the game. It's the drama and the intrigue and the emergent player interactions, but it should all be context within the idea that it's just a game. Um, so there's no need for negativity within the community. Let's focus on the game that we love and make it better.
Yeah. All right. So I think that was a pretty good Q&A. We learned a lot about your server, a lot of the systems within your server. For the few people who watched during the live stream, thank you very much. Anyone who's watching this during its VOD days, I guess is the best way to describe it. Thank you also if you watched the entire, it's been like hour and a half now. Wall, any last statements before we say goodbye?
No, I talked way too much. I'd like to like to let you get a word in edgewise here at some point. But thank you for having me on, and definitely thank you for taking the time to sit down and ask me questions about the project. I've been working. I work on this project at least 16 hours a day, 7 days a week for the last few years now, and I put in a lot of time and effort. I have major content patches that come out on a near monthly, sometimes even weekly basis. Just implemented the survival skill, and at the end of this month, or at the end of the previous month, and at the end of this month, I'm going to implement a game-changing update, one that will revolutionize the entire world. The world itself has expanded nearly tenfold, and we'll have so much more to discover and explore after I'm done. Uh, it's definitely exciting, and I don't know if he's talked about it at all, but basically the entire world map that you see on the overworld map is now available to travel to. Everything. We're talking being able to sail from one side of the sea to the other. So more details on that in the future. Stick around for the end of the month when I have the patch announcements. And then, of course, next month, at the end of the month, at the end of the year, the beta will launch. So be sure to join in. It's full 1 through 60 progression. The beta server will be open for one full year up until the end of 2024. when live launches, and beta progression will offer some unique rewards and benefits. So definitely come check it out, come play through. Obviously, things will be wiped for the beta, so people can progress 1 through 60 with no GM Island stuff.
Oh,
Then, obviously, when fresh launches, it gets wiped, but some tabards, some mounts, things like that will persist. Death trial characters currently on the alpha will be rolled over into the beta, so if you want to start playing right now, go roll up a Death trial character, and you'll have access to that during the beta, so that doesn't go away. But yeah, definitely come check it out. It's a lot of fun. A lot of people have been logging in for the past few weeks now that updates have been ramping up, getting closer to the beta. So definitely a lot more to do.
so real quick, you don't have to ramble, just yes or no. So you're telling me uh Eastern Kingdoms Kalimdor will be on the same map, and I can make a small little boat, not one of those big guild boats you mentioned earlier, make a little mini boat and then go crash right into the maelstrom.
I had thought about putting them on the same map. I could put Eastern Kingdoms and Calibur on the same map, but logistically speaking, it's better that they're kept on separate maps. It offers way more real estate to the world. Um, I'll show you a picture right now. I don't know if you want to show it on stream. Let me load it up real
If
quick.
you allow me to, I can.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. Let me load it up real quick.
I got excited there. I was like, yes, I will be the first one to jump into the maelstrom and die.
You will be able to swim into the maelstrom and die.
Oh, there you go.
Possibly even survive. The maelstrom is a planned zone. It will be very uniquely implemented. Like I said, I did consider putting both continents on the same map, but then realized logistically it's better that they're on different maps. Just
It'll,
way more
it'll
real estate.
it'll probably keep like the lag and stuff down, so it doesn't have to render as much area.
The game world engine would handle it better, but I would have to redo everything in the game. Basically, every NPC has like a set world coordinate, and if I move both continents onto the same map, then I have to redo everything. So, and there is a few other issues that would arise in terms of not having an actual. I measured it out, and there wouldn't actually be enough to scale it to size without each continent bordering the edge of the map on the other side. So I figured having the sea on both sides and then swimming out into the maelstrom in the middle where there would be like a potential loading screen, separating the two seas. But either way, take a look at this.
I think that would work pretty good. Like how you have the gate to go from Eastern Plaguelands to Quel'Thalas. Like, it doesn't have to be a big swirling thing, but you load into the next thing just like a loading screen, like you said. That'd be probably a good way to do it. Where are you posting it
Oh
into
yeah.
DMs?
Yeah, here I'll send it to you in DMs. I gotta whip it up in paint real quick.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
Oh,
You can take a look at that. That is Kalimdor, and that is Eastern Kingdoms. On the right picture, Eastern Kingdoms, you can see that orange border around the sea. That is the previous boundary of the map. That orange border, that is the original Eastern Kingdoms border. Um, you can see on the bottom left part of the right image, there's a few islands that are normally not there off the coast of Westfall and Stranglethorn. It's the original island of Dr. Lepidus and Gilligam's Isle that were in the alpha but cut from the game before vanilla. Those have been restored and they're fully explorable. I'll even send a picture from them. Well, I'll save that for the next one.
it looks like there's more islands just west of them, like little baby islands.
Yes, those are actually those are part of the abyssal undersea plain, and that's because the original assets from the alpha map are basically just like big chunks that are not finished on either side of the island, as they were in early development. So I took a few creative liberties with the terrain surrounding the islands, and it's pretty radically different than something that we've seen before. In fact, I'll even go show it. But I love the effect, and this is because if you notice, that orange border surrounding Eastern Kingdoms was the previous boundary. Now every single one of those squares is in play. That's all ocean. those all those black squares are, if you kind of measure it, it's like 4 times the width of the continents, and that's all open sea now. That open sea has islands, it has underwater ruins, it has sunken valleys, it has hidden treasures, world bosses that are swimming around. To travel from one side of the map to the other now on Wallcraft at standard player movement speed now takes you one 1 hour and 40 minutes or 80 minutes. No, 1 hour and 20 minutes. Yeah, about 80 minutes, I think. You travel at about like a very set rate, and each cell is about 533 units wide. So yeah, it takes you a little bit more, about an hour and a half to run all the way across from one side to the other. This entire map is the biggest thing anyone's ever seen in vanilla. I can absolutely assure you that. And what's cool about this is that this map will have all the original locations that are seen on the world map, all the, the Wandering Isle, the Dragon Isles, uh, Zandalar, Telebim,
Plunder
obviously
Isle.
Lepidus, and the Maelstrom, even possibly Northrend. I can expand Northrend to be all the way up far north in this sea. So you
Probably
basically
put it
sail a
right.
boat.
Probably put it like like north of Eastern kingdoms, because there's a bigger area up there beside that's not present in
I,
Kalimdor.
I would put it on a third map, and then
Oh,
you would
okay.
just go all the way up to you'd go all the way up to the border of either Kalimdor or Eastern Kingdoms, and then you'd be all the way up into Northrend there.
Probably make it like a
So
Warcraft 3 styled Northrend.
yeah, with like Northrend occupying like a top bar above both of those,
So you
basically.
so you'll have like Baelor, Zuldair, all of the, even like the island that Alexstrasza's cave is on.
Yep. The Tomb of Sargeras will be basically explorable. And here, I could probably screen share. I don't know if you can do screen share.
Because the Broken Isles is literally just spat of isles where a bunch of ruins are. They're not what you see in Legion. That was all pulled out of their ass.
Yeah, and
that's
like
a that's a big pet peeve of mine.
the original designs are so scuffed compared to what it should be. It's honestly, it's so sad. Like how much they threw away for basically ease of access. Later designs that they implemented are not true and honest vanilla. Let me send you a screenshot though, real quick. Let me go grab one. Yeah, you can hear my mic. I have it bound to control, so sorry.
That's fine. My dad didn't realize I was live streaming, so while you were talking about the extra races, I'm just like, shut the fuck up, Dad. I had to go close my door. All right.
That's that's the island of Dr. Lepidus. And to the left of that is those little islands that you were seeing. That's like an abyssal undersea plain. And that's because in Wallcraft there's no more fatigue for swimming too far out in the ocean. You can sail anywhere. The boats, the transport ships, I'm even possibly planning on having them sail the entire distance, which would be like a 15-minute journey at their speed. Um, to get from one continent to the other.
Well,
I,
that would also incentivize mages to teleport people.
yeah, and I'd love to have that type of incentive. In fact, a gnome racial would be access to a gnomish transport network between Ironforge and a location over in Kalimdor.
Well, yeah, we already
And
have the little
basically,
teleporters. Like, there's like one in Tenaris and one in Booty Bay. I
yep,
completely.
yep, and a gnome racial would be access to that, so gnomes would have the ability to travel around the world pretty quick, and that would kind of like even them out for the other races, increased travel methods. Think about night elves; their wisp form has water walking. They can run across water at basically 60% mount speed. A lot of people were complaining because they said all planes running for Tauren is better than wisp form for night elf since Tauren's goes faster, and I kept telling them, I said, Just wait until the future updates hit. You're not going to be making that complaint anymore. You're going to be saying planes running. It needs to be updated now. And that's because the Wisp's water walking is extremely powerful for traversing this giant water-filled map, exploring all the islands. It's basically like having a free boat for the Wisp.
And then if you do decide to have the boats go the entirety of the way, would you have like two boats, kind of like how the tram does, where it's like one leaves one end, one leaves the other end, so they kind of meet in the middle, go past each other?
Yeah, there's a map, an original map design with the transport routes listed out, and they would follow those original routes. The zeppelins and the boats that go between the continents would actually take flight across the entire journey. And this harkens back to the old EverQuest design, and older MMOs. Like in EverQuest, there were boats and transports that would only show up like every 4 hours. And the transport to get on the transport and wait around might even be like a 20-minute, 30-minute transit time. So to get to some places, you would basically have to make preparations and schedule your day around that and say, oh, okay, 5 o'clock is when it gets here. That's another 3 hours. I have 3 hours to do stuff, but I can't miss this boat, or I'm not going to be able to make it to raid tonight because they're on this continent. That type of gameplay is so emergent and or it's so I don't know the term, but it's what the element and the essence of an RPG is. It puts you in the state of the character to where these restrictions and limitations, and that's what art is working within the confines of restrictions and limitations. That's what good gameplay is, essentially. Fast travel, I think, is bad for the game. I don't think it should be difficult to get around the world. I just think that the world should be segmented in ways that some places are more difficult to get to than others and require more time and preparation to reach them. If you look at every expansion beyond vanilla, everything is just a portal away in Shatrath or Dalaran. You click on the portal, you're there. You click on looking for Dungeon Finder, you're there. There's nowhere in the world that's difficult to get to. Wallcraft doesn't have that problem. There are many places in the world that are very difficult to get to. The map, and this is something I'd love to talk about, is this map I've been working on since the 27th of last month. I've been working on this for over 10 days now. Every waking moment. I've probably already put in 150 hours. I've generated almost 2 terabytes of map data while constructing this map. It's layer upon layer of the most intricately crafted maps that are optimized for this. It has no lag on load. The client handles it beautifully. And we're talking each map has 63 by 63 tiles. That's 3,844 tiles for each of the world maps. Almost 8,000 tiles for the world maps themselves, plus another few thousand for all the other maps. We're talking 10,000 tiles in the game world right now. The game world itself has just tripled. uh, Very radical expansion, but the thing is, what it offers is depth to the world. One of my favorite feelings of playing a game like Minecraft is having a fort somewhere so far away that it takes me 4 hours to get to it. And I have to develop like fast travel to get there and harvest the resources from over there. But it's got some really good stuff over there that I want to bring back to my base with all my friends over here. So it's like getting the preparations and journeying and making that travel, that's the epic part. And that's what people always say about vanilla WoW. It's it's not that, oh, there's a lack of flight paths, so I have to run. It's that the world is big enough for you to necessitate having to think about how do I get from point A to point B. It's not just clicking on a portal, it's making a journey, and there's danger involved, there's risk, there's rewards, there's potential gains. There's so many things to experience along the way that the run is often not that inconvenient. Um,
Well, would you be willing to kind of go in the middle? Like, I completely agree that retail WoW went way too far, where there's fucking portals everywhere. It's like I think that's way too much. But vanilla WoW doesn't bother me at all. Now with this, because it's so immense, it's like well, shit, I forgot, like, just earlier when we were just starting the Q&A, it's like, oh, shit, I forgot this thing. I gotta turn around and go back to Thunderbluff real quick. So, in that, would you like to meet in the middle and do what RuneScape did? Well, old school RuneScape, because I don't play RuneScape 3, but what they did where you start off and you have to travel everywhere on foot. That's how you start off. And then as you progress the game, you can unlock other methods like the trains with the dwarves, like the hot air balloons and all that kind of stuff. So not really, and it's not everywhere. You know, it's not like a portal system in the city where it takes you every. No, no, no. You still have to run to the different areas, and they only take you to specific areas. So you still have to run from point A to point B. It's just not an hour. It takes you 10 minutes or 20 minutes instead. You know what I mean?
I fully agree. And what I don't mean for the system is to, what I don't mean is for the world to feel so big that it's difficult to traverse or that you have any type of difficulties in your gameplay because of that fact. The way that I would counter that type of fatigue that a player might experience would be never locking repetition, or how should I phrase this? I would never lock a repeatable system behind a distant journey, because then the journey just becomes repetitious. The journeying cycle should always have a sense of exploration and accomplishment. Um, so yeah, like RuneScape does this great for an MMO world that's not really that particularly big. All of RuneScape, you can run across it in like 13 minutes. The world isn't really that particularly big. So a lot of the grinds are repeatable grinds that you have to do, and having a faster access to get to that point, even if it's just saving a single tile, is vastly worth it in RuneScape. Um, so those types of supplements that you gain to your ability to travel around the world as you progress, that's a great system. And I definitely will have things like that in place, which I already do. With some things, you look at like the emergency flare gun, which is obtained from a rare mob in Badlands. It's a trinket that allows you to hearth back to either Ironforge or Ogrimmar once an hour. And it's very good because then you can set your Hearthstone elsewhere out in the world, and you have an option to travel back and forth between those continents then. And it's basically like unlocking an amulet of eternal glory in Warcraft, essentially. If you get your hands on that trinket, it comes from a rare mob that respawns every 40 hours, though. And luckily, it's a quest item drop, so anybody in your raid group will get the item if you get the kill credit on the mob, but it's going to be highly contested. Uh, Zarakatl in Badlands drops that for both Alliance and Horde, so it's definitely something that every player is going to want. It's a tradable bind on equip trinket. It's going to fetch a very high price. Things like that is what gives flavor to the world, because you're going to have people who basically make it a business to camp this mob, and there's hundreds of mobs like him with the same type of power value gained from him. Um, you're gonna have people like camping this mob to sell this trinket because it enables you to get around the world. But despite having the advances of transportation, I never want transportation, like I said, to gate content that is expected to be repeated by players. Basically, if there's a raid that's off on the far corner of the map, I'm going to have a way to get to that place in a reasonable amount of time. Um, But what will not have a fast way to travel to is an island that's not declared to the players, that's unexplored, that has buried treasure on it, that's meant to be more so something you find in the element of exploration and journeying. So the purpose of expanding the game world size is to incorporate more of that and less of the tedium that people would expect from a larger game world, which is why I haven't bothered really to expand the land mass itself for any reason, because there's no purpose itself. There only needs to be new things to explore, really, not more things to run to back and forth.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Okay, we went on a little bit longer than anticipated. We're now at about almost 2 hours, so I think we're going to hard stop here. No more questions, no more answers. We're done.
Hey, it was definitely a pleasure. And yeah, sorry to hold you up there. Definitely thank you for
Oh, I've
having me
got
on,
nowhere to
man.
be. I'm just
I had the stream pulled up, but I exited out. I don't know if you showed everybody the same picture, but with the water
Oh,
rendered.
yes, yes, I did. It's actually up right now.
Yeah. I love the way that like the abyssal terrain came out because it's hard to really experience from the camera shot in Nugget, but as a player swimming through that, you don't have the same visibility because it's deep sea. So your eyes don't really see the whole depth of it or the whole scope of it. Um, but like swimming through it, it feels colossal. It feels very epic and engaging. And having stuff like herbs and treasure chests and stuff down there is going to be very fun for players. Um, Before we wrap this up, the last thing in just another 30 seconds to ramble here. Um, Part of the system is going to be deep sea diving. There's going to be a lot of like underwater ruins and crevices and caves and stuff to explore. The fatigue system has been reworked. You don't get fatigue from being out in deep water, but if you're underwater while out in deep ocean, then you'll have fatigue unless you're basically wearing deep sea diving apparatus. Well, you have this stuff equipped, your character sinks all the way to the bottom of the ocean and runs around normally. So it's a very pleasurable experience to have underwater content. You don't have to worry about that on Wallcraft. And more on that later, though, for when the patch announces. Thank you for having me, man.
Yeah, I'll be sure when you post your update on this to cover it on my channel. So if anyone is watching still, then please like and subscribe this stream. Like the video, subscribe to my channel rather. That way you can see all the updates on Wallcraft. I know it took a little bit of time to kind of get into the flow with this server. When I'm covering so many servers, it's kind of hard, but now I'm definitely more invested into this server, so I will be making more and more videos just talking about updates, at least starting from now on. I don't think I'm going to go back and do stuff, but yeah, definitely your next update, I'll cover that. I still have 2 more videos of exploring the various new areas of Wallcraft. I'll give you a hint. I actually forgot which the next video is, but the next video should be, oh, it doesn't even show here. I think it's Karazhan. Yeah, that should be the next one that comes up. It'll show up next week, about Monday. It'll launch, so you guys could see the new updates to the Karazhan area and a special surprise on the inside. So until then, I'm going to end the stream here. Everyone,